I don't think I'm talented enough. I actually can't draw. I don't know how to paint. I don't know what to paint, and I don't have time for this. When it comes to a sketchbook practice, there are so many excuses not to start. Believe me, I've used them all. So today I thought I would help you break that barrier by letting fun lead the way into creativity and letting our materials suggest ideas on how to fill our sketchbook pages. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Paula. I'm a full-time artist, and if you're not new, welcome back. Today, let's have fun with our sketchbooks and get creative. And what better way to get creative than with a fresh, brand new sketchbook? As I said, we're going to start by having fun and playing with our materials. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some watercolors and just splat some of it on the paper. I created a watercolor stain by using super watered down watercolor and just dropping it on my page with a brush. You could actually even pour the watercolor directly onto the paper. I tried using a little pipette to drop some watercolor, but I just ended up using my hand to get a random shape. After that first step, all we have to do is let it dry. But because my paper was bulging up so much and the watercolor was moving to the sides, I decided to place a heavy object on it to keep it flatter as it dried, and my little plaster bear left a mark. Oops. But it's all good, we're playing here. I just took a brush with a little bit of water and moved the pigment from that stain a little bit. So the first thing I thought about doing was drawing some branches with leaves. Florals and hearts are usually my go-to, but of course you can paint whatever you want. I was enjoying my time painting leaves when it occurred to me that the stain left by my little plaster bear looked like a sun or a moon. So I just used more watercolor to make it rounder and support that idea. After working a little bit on that, I painted more and more branches with different shades of brown to make them look closer or further away. Then, for the top of the page, I just followed the stains from the watercolor again and painted some clouds. The way the watercolor dried is what gave me ideas on what to paint and not the other way around. And that is pretty fun because it takes some of the pressure of coming up with something to paint off. I got really inspired following the stains and the way the watercolor dried, just working on top of that. So I added a bunch of clouds and then went back to that circle to make it more evident by painting around it. I painted even more branches for the front of the drawing, and then I used a little bit of watercolor to make the circle look like a moon. A crescent moon actually, by adding more white paint to only one of its sides. Finally, I added some stars by dotting paint with the back of the brush, and this is our first idea made out of a random watercolor stain. For the second idea, I'm going to play with something that is super popular, but I honestly hadn't tried before. It almost seems like something I should have done in school, but I never did it. For this one, I'm also making a border with washi tape, and I wanted to share that someone recommended that if your washi tape is too good, it's better to stick it on your arm first so you get rid of some of the stickiness before putting it down on your paper. And that way, when you peel it off, it won't rip the paper out. I love this tip, and so far it's worked perfectly for me. Thank you. After that, I just filled the whole rectangle with very watered down watercolors again, and I'm mixing some shades of red and orange because someone suggested that I tried something with fall colors. And as you can see, I have my pipette ready next to me, and now it's full of rubbing alcohol. So with the wet background ready, I started to drop some alcohol onto it, and to be honest, the result wasn't at all what I was expecting. I didn't think the alcohol would clear out the pigment as much as it did. For some reason, I thought I was going to get more like concentric circles and that I would have like a page of mandalas I could play with. No matter, I just kept going to see what happened and then let it dry. After dried and a satisfying tape peel, it was time to play with the result. Again, I'm just going off from what I saw in the dried watercolor. And what I saw is a tree. So I grabbed my coloring pencils and I started to fill the bottom of the page by drawing a tree trunk. But honestly, as soon as I started using the coloring pencils, I knew I wasn't feeling them. So I switched back to watercolors to define the branches a little bit more by darkening the background in that area. Then I thought I would make the tree a little bit abstract by creating my own little circles around each alcohol drop. So I started to paint those with different colors and different watercolor consistencies. This became a super entertaining process. I had a lot of fun with it. At some point, I even added a little bit of neon yellow, and I thought that made the composition more dynamic and interesting. While that area dried, I went back to the branches and I decided to add thin lines to them to give them more detail and texture. I got playful with it, and I thought it would be fun to have some of those lines look like a P and a C and have my initials hidden there. If you've seen any of my videos before, you may know this. I'm obsessed with painting trees. I'm always playing with them in my sketchbook, and I think I just ran into a very beautiful way to paint them. So I will definitely be revisiting this idea because I did love it so much. Love the end result, and I want you to visualize it as a painting like I am doing right now. So I'm going to use a mock-up to blow it up and show it to you on a wall. Beautiful. Third playful idea, and now we are going to play with gradients. It's always so much fun to do gradients with watercolor because of how beautifully the paint mixes. So I thought this was going to be a very entertaining activity that will reduce the pressure of coming up with an idea. I just painted an S shape on the middle of my page. I went for green, but of course we could use any color. And the idea is to paint next to it with colors that would be next to green on the color wheel so that they can easily mix together. I started by placing yellows next to my shape and then went with darker green for the other side. I am literally just playing with it, letting my colors mix, not taking anything too seriously. I also used some blue because blue is next to green on the color wheel, and I thought those would mix nicely too. Once it dried, I thought it was a little bit too light and I wanted to add more color, so I just came back in with the same colors but less watered down and more saturated to get a darker result, and again I played until I was happy with it. This is how it dried the second time, and I really love this activity because you're basically creating your own reverse coloring pages, and I really wanted to use this brand new pen I got for my Inktober project because I really fell in love with it. I love not only that it's waterproof, but that it is a brush. You can change the width of the line depending on the pressure you apply to it. It's great. But my main reason for including this idea is because it's such a free, relaxing, and beautiful project. I have a lot of creative friends that watch my content who suffer from chronic pain, and I really wanted to share with them that being super loose and super relaxed with your art practice can yield beautiful results. I know how pain can truly be an impediment when you're creating. I myself tend to have very severe back and neck pain. So for example, when I did the Inktober project in only 3 days, I put so much pressure on my wrist, neck, and mind that by the end of each day, I was in so much pain that I really needed to stretch and take something for it. I couldn't even move, and it was because the outlining and the style I used for those drawings took so much of my attention and concentration that as I drew every single line, I had my whole body in tension. So tense, like I could feel the tension in my jaw. But when I do reverse coloring like this, it's the complete opposite story because I'm not worried about outlining anything precisely, not even my watermarks. I'm just flowing with it and having fun, and I put lines wherever I feel like it, and they are organic and soft. So my mind and my body are on this relaxed, meditative state. And it really doesn't matter where I draw the lines, it still works out somehow and it looks pretty. So as you have been watching, I was just having fun and creating lines, going over some borders, playing with my pen, just keeping things very light, and this makes me really happy. And I hope it helps you too. And as you can see at the end, the result is so beautiful. This is why I've done it more than once. I just take different approaches to it, and of course, to support my point, I am going to share this page on a mock-up as a gorgeous work of art in a beautiful space. Moving on to my third idea, I'm bringing that Inktober sketchbook I was just talking about as a reference. And you can see, for example, in that illustration that I'm showing you, there was a lot of precision drawing. All of those little lines, I had to be very focused. But what we're taking from this page is the idea to have a smaller rectangle within the page. So I started by drawing that and taping around it to create a limit. And this playful idea is all about creating a continuous line. One endless scribble all over the rectangle, filling out the space. Once I had my scribble, I chose to play with it a little bit because it seemed too light and irregular, so I made it thicker in some areas and I went over it in some others. I love the process of changing line widths. I find it relaxing. When I was happy with the way the curvy line looked, I started to doodle in between some of the spaces it left. There was no real plan, just filling spaces with more curved lines. You could definitely fill them with other shapes too. This is about play. Fill them all, fill a few, just have fun, do whatever you want. When I finished, my final thought was to paint the areas closest to the edges so when I peeled the tape, they would create an edge. But I actually enjoyed the part of painting so much that I ended painting it all. I peeled the tape off, and because I got too excited drawing my continuous line, I did have a couple of marks outside the tape on the paper. But in this case, this was a super simple fix, and I just used a thicker marker to trace over the rectangle and those two lines, creating a nice little frame for my colorful scribble. That was a lot of fun, and I truly did love the result. Next idea, and I already have my tape on. Now we are going to get ideas from doing some emotional transfer onto paper. I chose an orange coloring pen for my first lines because I was feeling very frustrated at that moment. But to be perfectly honest, right now, as I'm editing, I don't remember why I was so frustrated. What I remember is that I felt I needed to release that emotion on paper, so I had the orange pencil in my hand and I actually flipped the orientation of my notebook and just started drawing. You can see both my orange and yellow lines are pretty aggressive because I was really letting that paper have my frustration. And then I grabbed the blue colored pencil to do some grounding, calmer lines. I don't know, that felt better. And here's the result of me putting my emotions onto paper. Not very pretty, and I have to be honest, for a second, I thought about just ripping the page off and starting something prettier to share with you because I felt intimidated by trying to create something of these first lines that were not that great. But then I thought about the purpose of this video and the purpose of me sharing my ideas on my channel to begin with, and it's just remembering that art is not perfect and that in mistakes and practice is where we discover beautiful things. So I decided to carry on, and as you can see, I started adding watercolors to see what would happen. I decided to keep the same color, so I used yellow, orange, and blue on top of the lines. After that first layer of color dried, I decided to add thinner lines to make things softer and more rhythmical. But to be honest, the yellow and orange from underneath were being just too loud for me. So I also added a layer of beige watercolor on top to tone it down a little bit. That was the first step that made me feel more confident about this page because I like taking the tone down, but I also like that putting this watercolor on top made the original colors bleed a little bit and everything was mixing in a nice way. Once that dried a little bit, I painted more lines now with red and with a little bit of brown. And now, doing this, I was truly more present in the process and in the composition, just adding things more intentionally and softly to try to make this page a little bit nicer. I honestly could have played with it more, but I thought that was a good stopping point, so I got the satisfaction from removing the tape, and here it is. Of course, not my favorite page I've ever done, but considering how it started, I don't hate it. And I think maybe seeing it as a huge abstract painting on a wall would make me appreciate it even more. Yeah, that does it. Happy with that one and ready to move to our next idea. Okay, so we're stepping back into play and away from interpreting emotions. Now I'm just going to use plain water to paint the square on my page. You cannot really see it on camera, but it's there. So let's play with watercolors again by just tapping them onto the water and allowing them to move as they wish. Just dropping bits of colors here and there to see what happened, and I even tilted my sketchbook just to have the colors move on their own. I painted a second rectangle at the bottom of the page, and then again I added paint on top and let it move. This is how that first step dried, and again I'm just going to follow my inspiration on top of the stains and do whatever the shapes inspire me to do. I thought I would paint some lines on the bottom square, but I didn't really like how that was looking, so I just took a wet brush and went over that. Then I decided to use the same brush that just grabbed some pigment to flick it a bit and get some stains on the page. I just kept adding stuff, tilting and seeing what happened. I'm really very much just playing. For this page though, I have to admit I got a little bit impatient with drying times, so I just grabbed a paper towel and blotted all of the excess water because I wanted to try the thin lines again. So I started painting those on the top this time, and as you can see, the paper is not dry yet. So in some parts when I paint the lines, they move. But I actually like the effect it's creating. I was just adding color randomly and maybe intuitively. Went back to the idea of painting lines on the bottom part of the painting and just allowing them to move by adding a little bit more water. While I was playing, I finally came up with a way to join both areas, so I dried the page a little bit with my heat gun, and then I started to paint some dots to connect everything. This is basically an exercise in mark making. It's pretty abstract, but I feel this type of free painting is one of the places where you'll get ideas and techniques for other works. And here's the final result, and I think it's actually pretty cool. Okay, next idea. I'm taking some watercolors and just creating a very wet rectangle in the middle of my page because again, I'm playing with something I feel I should have used before, but haven't. I'm bringing in some salt in this cute little dish I made a few videos back, which I'll link in the description if you're interested in seeing how I created this cutie. I just thought it would be so precious for it to have the salt in it. So, paint down, and I started to add the salt, but then again I thought my background was too light, so I added more blue and purple. More salt on top, which I thought was going to react instantly, but it actually takes a little bit of time. You can see a little bit of how it started changing on this footage. Once it looked dry, I started to remove the salt, and I didn't know that it looks dry and it feels dry, but underneath some of the largest grains of salt, it's still wet. So I mean, I'm just telling you for you to know, because me, I just decided to move ahead with it, move everything with the brush and paper towel and start to play. I have to be honest, my original idea for using the salt was to create some type of floral design. I thought the reaction of the salt was going to look like little flowers, but once I clear off the salt grains from the paper, it looked more like a sky in outer space to me. So I decided to go with that and started to add more color with my brush like I did in the first exercise, following what I saw and creating some clouds. I had fun playing, adding more purples and blues and just making the scene look even more like a sky or like space. When I was happy with that first layer of clouds, I painted a golden moon behind one of them. This is one of my other go-to things I like to use, you know, hearts, moons, flowers, and I painted the moon and decided I wanted this page to look more like an illustration, something maybe out of a tarot deck. So I painted some circles around the moon, and I also painted lines going around some of the little circles. So I painted some circles around the moon, and I also painted lines going around some of the little circles that the salt left, turning them into stars or planets. I was done playing with my gold paint, and although I thought I would maybe ruin it, I added more dark blue paint behind it. I was afraid about this, but when I did it, I actually quite liked it because it gave more depth and more of that illustration feel. And yeah, this is my finished page. It turned out to be clouds, not what I expected, but I still love it. And that takes us to the end of today's video. I hope you like these 7 playful ideas that you can use to fill your sketchbook. You can play with salt, you can play with adding water first and just making stains. You can play by transferring your emotions onto the paper. You could also start a page by creating a continuous line or by using gradient. You can play by dropping alcohol on your page or even just dropping a lot of watercolor on top and seeing what comes from that watercolor splat. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know I certainly had fun. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it or leaving a comment on what you liked so I can create more beautiful content for you to enjoy. I hope that I'll see you next Friday and that you're having the most wonderful day. Bye!